Awatam male. Ashka ulugal ata. Kalem siludo. Lesnidu kedar.
Did you by chance get any of that?
Well, it's just the Mothman is asking for some bird magic to fix their lamp. Don't worry about it. They do this every other month. It'll be fine. Trust me. Nothing wrong is gonna happen. No, seriously, nothing wrong is gonna happen.
It's been a bit difficult for me to get some of these videos done, not just because I can't seem to be able to stop playing Metroid Dread, but also because with every playthrough I seem to discover a new detail that have made it hard for me to decide when it's the right time to stop so I could focus on the script. It's very awesome getting some new lore added to the series that show us some personal development after fusion without using much dialogue, while at the same time giving us more finer details that help add a bit more depth to some of the games of the past. And I think these were the small bits I enjoyed the most and that truly showed me that Sakamoto and his team really went all out to make this world truly feel alive. I'm not just talking over the cool stuff like Adam asking Samus if she had any objections, or the Emmys being a sign that the Federation learned their lesson after fusion, or that awesome moment when Samus spoke in Chozo because of course she would know the language, she was raised by them. But I'm referring more to the obscure details that this game had in its visuals, which helped shed some more light into previous titles and other media that help expand their lore in some way, while also trying to offer some explanations to their enigmas. And needless to say, most of this video are just my personal theories on the matter. Nothing here is quite official yet, so make sure to take them with a grain of salt. Also, I know I will probably overlook a couple of details here and there, especially considering how new Dread still is in my mind, so I may do a follow-up video in the future going over some of the things I might miss. So to start, I would like to touch the relationship between the two Chozo tribes, which I personally doubt that there were enemies in any major way until Ravenbeak's action in Chozo Memory 11. This is coming from the fact that both groups ultimately wanted the same thing, peace in space, even if it was through different means and a way for their species to survive. And considering that they probably collaborated on plenty of experiments like say Samus's DNA transfusion, and how the Toha greeted the Mocking with open arms and happiness on SR-38, it leads me to believe that Ravenbeak took some extreme measures to accomplish their goals on his own terms, which might have been the key turning point. In a way, you could argue that the reason to why Memory 11 was more or less a hidden mystery was for Ravenbeak to try and hide what really happened on the planet, and not arouse any suspicion to his plan, making everyone believe that there was still peace amongst both tribes as they worked for the common benefit of the race. But I guess the main counterpoint to this comes in the final conversation with Ravenbeak, who is disguised as Adam, where he says that the Metroids are supposed to be hostile towards the Mocking, and that in a way this also caused the Metroid DNA inside of Samus to awaken, but I honestly find this a bit odd. The Chozo memories showed us what appears to be some Mocking present on SR-38 before the Metroids mutated. So why would the Thoha purposely add this feature into the bioweapons, or why would Choirobe not mention this beforehand? On top of this, if the Metroids react to the presence of the Mocking, shouldn't the DNA in her body have already reacted to her own genes, considering that Samus has a bit of both tribes in her? To me, it seemed more like some guessing work from Ravenbeak, or at least his conclusions without fully understanding the Metroid's design, or perhaps even some misinformation given to him by Choirobe on purpose. At the same time, I want to say that the central units could have easily been mass-produced computers made by the aliens to control various of their machines and infrastructures. Perhaps this could mean that Mother Brain was in fact one of these units, given some form of sentience to fulfill her original role as the Chozo's legacy and being able to control more things inside of Sevis. But it's interesting to consider that the computer was most likely also a unique combination of both tribes, seeing as her goals align a lot with those from Ravenbeak of peace by galactic conquest, while being able to use their weaponry like the Hyper Beam, yet still being able to control the Metroids just like the Toha. This also in turn makes me wonder about Samus's relation with the baby Metroid. Could it be that thanks to some of Samus's Toha genes, most likely inherited by Grey Voice, that she was able to control the baby Metroid, who hadn't the opportunity to mutate just like its brethren? Considering the lore of the Chozo memories and Dread, there could be a possibility that this game is retroactively adding some new lore by having the baby confuse Samus for its mother, since it could be in some way reacting to her Toha lineage. Another big mystery fans have been stumped on is what seems to be the return of Kraid, and how did he end up in ZDR? Well, to be honest, I don't think this boss is the same one we encountered in older games, or even a clone of him, but just a different member of the same species. This is mostly due to what we see in the second Chozo archive, where the Mocking were trying to enslave the creature with ambiguous results. Considering that the Chozo here still have the red eyes, it means that they had yet to reach SR38, thus this taking place sometime before the Chozo memories, and implying that the boss we know should still be on Sebes. So perhaps the reason it lashes out when Samus enters his chambers is not because this Kraid recognizes her personally, but because it assumes it's another Chozo who has come to torture him. It's sort of a Pavlovian response, if you may. Speaking of clones, I want to mention Ravenbeak's master plan. At first it was as simple as defeating Samus to have an Emmy extract her Metroid DNA to create an army. But upon seeing her new powers awakening, he decides to let her live and grow stronger. This is perhaps why he released the X-Parasites in the first place, to force the Metroid DNA inside her to mutate like the ones on SR38, just for him to have a stronger subject to use as an army. However, in the final battle, the Mocking reveals that he could now make an army of Samus, and that he had no more use of her. In which case, why come to the trouble of luring her all the way to Itarash? My guess is that he was abandoning ZDR since it became infested with the X-Parasites and wanted to continue his plans somewhere else. Now that Samus had awakened her powers, the planet had more or less served its purpose, and this could be the safest way for him to fight her without running the risk of exposing himself to the parasites on the surface. Part of me thinks that this was more or less a taunt or bluff to make Samus feel more hopeless, perhaps referring that he no longer needed her alive to achieve his goal, and that after his victory he would be able to begin making his army. I want to say this because in what other opportunity was the Chozo able to extract her DNA for his plan? And if so, why not unleash a clone or two to confront her in the first place? So to me, it seemed more like an intimidation tactic while revealing his true intentions when he was sure of his victory. Something I want to mention is that maybe this plot element more or less confirms a theory I proposed in one of my older videos, in which I suggested that what caused the Metroids to evolve on SR38 could have been the Aeon Energy, a life force of sorts that was found in the creatures on the planet, which could also explain why the baby Metroid grew giant instead of mutating at the end of Super. And seeing how the X-Parasites were native to that planet, Samus continuing to consume them for health and power-ups could have resulted in helping awaken or mutate her Metroid powers, which culminate in the form of the Metroid armor in the end of the game, as a result of her lashing out in anger. Which is a cool detail considering she slowly gets more aggressive body language starting after Quiet Rope's death. This, by the way, is also how she got the Hyper Beam, as a result of stealing or absorbing it from Ravenbeak and his armor when she got the upper hand in the cutscene. Another enigma I wanted to touch was regarding the Emmy's main function and how they were able to complete it. While a part of me still believes that the Emmys must have some sample of Samus's DNA to use as a guide to properly identify and hunt down the X-Parasites, I don't think they had Metroid strands in them for Ravenbeak to properly revive the species into an army. Because if so, then why would he go through the trouble of luring Samus onto his planet after the arrival of the robots? So perhaps the Emmy's sample was taken from the surgery at the beginning for infusion before Samus received her Metroid vaccine. And they used this to identify their target before employing their DNA extracting capabilities to be able to destroy the parasites, perhaps as a result from the research conducted aboard the BSL station. This thought mostly comes from the opening of the game, where we see the breakdown of the robots with a strand of DNA next to it, which kinda matches with Samus's infected DNA seen earlier in the intro. Then there's also the fact that each of the Emmy comes equipped with a specific ability that's normally associated with Samus's arsenal, which were given to the robots to probably be able to tackle any form that the parasites decided to take. This way, if one enemy failed, another one could succeed in its place and make it harder for the parasite to adapt to them. And while this may seem strange at first, that these Federation machines come with what most associate as Chozo-like power-ups, it's worth remembering that the Federation was able to supply some of your power-ups in Fusion via the download stations. And considering that their naming convention matches with the initials of their respective abilities, it's possible to assume that they came with their power-ups pre-installed onto the planet. Also, I want to mention that it's funny how the intro says that the enemies are just made of some powerful stuff, as in a way implying that nobody knows exactly what they're made of. Which is even more curious when you consider that it took Ravenbeak's excessive firepower to be able to put a dent in one of them. So it makes you wonder, why didn't the Federation use this material in their previous endeavors? Like, if you have something this strong, then why not have your troopers wear it as armor? Or even offer it to Samus since you rely on her so much. Since the material that makes them so indestructible has no name from what I'm aware of, I decided to name it Federation or Exilion Magic until further notice. Another cool imagery comes towards the end of the game, where we see this image of when Samus was giving her Chozo DNA, which aligns with what we saw in the manga. What is interesting about this image are the two shadowy figures on the right side of the frame, which I want to say are Old Bird and Grey Voice, since their silhouette matches with what we see in the manga's version of the same event. Others have mentioned that one of these Chozos could likely be Quiet Robe himself, which would help explain his warm behavior towards Samus, which seems to come from a personal level, and maybe why Ravenbeak decided to spare him in particular. Perhaps this was done as a sign of respect, or because Quiet Robe was the leader of the Toha on SR38, or simply the wisest one out of the group. I think there is also something else to consider regarding Zero Mission that's a bit more of a theory, since I doubt that this was a planned detail made by the developers back in the day. But in this game, you find two types of Chozo statues, those that give you the regular power-ups and the ones with the unknown items. And it makes me wonder if it was a way to symbolize the two Chozo tribes, since Dread suggests that the Makin did have some sort of influence on planet Sebes. So maybe the reason the armor you get from the Chozo Ghost is considered legendary is because it's compatible with not only items from both groups, but can also only be worn by someone who's considered to be the perfect mix of them. There's also another interesting imagery found in Ferenia that might tie back to this game, where we see some form of hieroglyphs that depict the Chozo fighting what appears to be Sebesian space pirates. So it makes me wonder if they're hinting to a new lore where it was the Chozo who took over Sebes or another planet, thus incentivizing the pirates to reclaim it, or perhaps some form of long rivalry between the two species altogether. Another cool imagery that ties this game with the lore in the manga comes from the second phase in the fight against Ravenbeak, where the Chozo reveals his wings and begins to attack you from the air. And while this might just seem like an excuse for a cool set piece, one panel in the manga shows Chozo warriors in the air with a similar imagery. So I want to think that this is yet another cool nod to the book from the part of the developers, which once again makes me wish it got a release outside of Japan. Speaking of the final battle, I find it a bit ironic that Ravenbeak wasn't able to defeat Samus when she fully awakened her powers, since he didn't exploit any of the Metroid's iconic weaknesses, such as using a form of the Morph Ball and bombs in order to break her grip on him, or even attacking with the Ice Beam or missiles to properly neutralize her. Which makes me wonder, how much did the Makin really know about the bioweapons in the first place, or if this was an intentional story detail made by the developers. And then comes the biggest head scratcher of them all, the ending of the game, where we see the ex-possessed Quiet Robe appear on Samus' ship as she tries to escape. This scene had me confused for the longest time, but I think I have come up with a possible solution to what happened in it. Although it's something extremely far-fetched, so it might just be a stretch at the end of the day. I do think that somehow Quiet Robe was able to possess or take over the ex-parasite even after death. And the reason I came to this conclusion is from the Chozo's sudden change in body language, going from a slump zombie-like figure before making his previous salute and giving Samus a warm smile, and willingly letting himself get absorbed. Considering all that we saw in Fusion and in this game, it's hard for me to believe that an X-Parasite would willingly let itself get consumed. And seeing how they copy the memories of their host, it would have known about Samus's abilities and to best avoid her. So perhaps there is a possibility that when the X first took over the body, it was simply reactivating the Emmy since it was one of the last things in Quiet Rogue's mind before dying, just in reverse. It's probably just going through the motions of the host while settling in, which could also explain why it also repeats the last words spoken by the Chosen. From there, Quiet Rogue found a way to essentially hijack the parasite and force it to go back to her ship, knowing that at some point Samus would return, so she can then absorb his Toha DNA and be able to control her Metroid abilities. I don't really have any other further explanation for this, but I do want to think it was a nice way for the developers to show us in one motion how the Metroids and the X-Parasites more or less disappear. And that in a way, Quiet Rogue was reminding Samus that the Chosen would be forever with her, regardless of what happens. But if you want a more scientific reason to why this happened, all I can say is that Quiet Rogue must have had such a high amount of bird magic that he was able to pull off something like this. Either way, it seems like a nice gesture from the developers to end this adventure and finally bring a close to the timeline and this story arc. And before anyone asks about those ships that disappear in Hanubia, I'm willing to believe that if the crash of Iterash on the surface of the planet was enough to start a chain reaction leading to its total destruction, then it most likely could have also blown up these ships in the process, since the outpost also suffers from some damage as well. If the X really wanted to escape, then why didn't they do it beforehand? They were free from Ellen halfway through the game, some already in Chozo bodies, so I find it a bit strange that we'll wait until now to escape, even if they're just using the host's memories. This hasn't stopped the parasites from fulfilling secondary goals in the past, so why magically do it here and now? Either way, Sakamoto has voiced that the 2D series will live on with a different story. So I think that with this ending, they were able to close the book on all the main threats of what I like to call the Metroid Saga. After all, if there is another Metroid game in the works, I would really like to see a new threat emerge and let some of these old ideas stay in the past to avoid things from becoming stale and repetitive. Which is for the better in all honesty, considering that they have been more or less using the same plot elements in the past couple of years. So I think it's time for the series to get a fresh start, so it's not just copying the same couple of story beats, and thus spark some creativity from the developers and see what they can come up with when using a clean slate. And this is what has me the most excited for the future of the series. And with this chapter finally wrapping the story leading to the X-Parasites and the Metroids on Sebes, it really opens the doors to countless possibilities with where the story can go next. And I can't wait to see what new dangers the developers will bring to the table and what the future holds for Samus's next adventure.
Every time I make a decision, something bad happens. So, I'm gonna need you to, really believe that nothing bad is gonna happen. Oh god, not another game!